it's Halloween soon, or now, depending on when this is uploaded, and I figured a Halloween video is probably the sort of thing a channel like mine is supposed to do, and I did the Groundhog Day video for Christmas, so, you know, Coraline is sort of a horror film, isn't it? I mean, basically, I read the book several months ago, and I've been keen to see the film, so I thought, why not combine it with Halloween and make this video? So I saw the film just now, not just now as in me speaking now, but as in when I wrote the notes I'm speaking from. Yeah, and this will be a bit like my Pirates of the Caribbean video in the sense it's sort of me drawing out the meaning, sort of talking about things that interested me, and sort of reviewing it. Hopefully it won't be too all over the place. So let's begin and say just what a wonderful film this is. You know, Coraline Jones, a girl who's moved with her family to a new house, basically discovers a hidden door that leads to an exact replica of her new home, except her other mother and other father, who look the same but have buttons for eyes, and they seem caring and nice at first, but kind of trap her there and horror ensues. I know I talk a lot on this channel about things being the perfect balance between two opposites. I think that's becoming a catchphrase of mine in a way, but this is the perfect mix between horror and wonder in my opinion. It's the right mix because the sense of spectacle is so important here, where the film begins with Coraline running out in search for adventure and finding adventure with stupid humour where her dad plays on the piano and they eat food with a gravy train to bring them gravy, which is just a dumb yet kind of charming joke, and there's this beautifully detailed garden with plants that tickle, and the mouse circus is just funny, and the performance of Miss Spink in Forcible, of course voiced by French and Saunders, is just stupid and fun, and we understand exactly why Coraline loves this world so much to begin with. There is genuine wonder and fun. That's important. Because there's a bit of a cliche in stories of like the don't eat the fruit thing, where there's some sort of dangerous fruit or whatever, and you as the audience know the character shouldn't eat it because something horrible will happen, but it's just so tasty and they can't resist, and it's a good trope that, but we as the audience aren't empathising in those moments, you know. We know eating the fruit is a stupid thing to do. We don't feel tempted ourselves and just feel a bit annoyed at how easily the protagonist does get tempted. However, here, in this film, we are sort of charmed by this world and tempted in exactly the same way Coraline is. We empathise totally with the fact she falls for it because it's just so fun and so beautifully animated. You know, it's obviously kind of sinister from the beginning, we know that, but the button eyes aren't played for dramatic horror at first. They're off-putting, they're kind of unsettling, but it's a bit more like a slightly weird quirk, you know, it is unsettling, but it's also fun, and the weirdness in general just makes this world more fun and adventurous for Coraline, and like the fact the other dad arranges the garden to be in the shape of Coraline's face, it seems fun and charming to Coraline in a moment, but when you think about that, that's actually a horrific thing to do. Imagine if someone did that in real life with your face, you'd be terrified. But we get why all of this world charms her, and I think that makes the gradual shift into horror so much more effective. And on a point of how beautiful and fun the world is, the animation is fantastic. The fact, firstly, that the people are all animated to sort of look a bit like dolls makes this motif of the doll as like an inhuman replica, a soulless copy of the real person, all the more impactful. But the scenery as well looks great, and I think more specifically it's the tiny details that make everything so interesting. That's what creates the real sense of adventure here. Neil Gaiman in all his writing is fantastic, with powerful, odd, strange imagery, such as the other mother tapping the side of her head, where that sound slowly becomes the sound of water dripping from the tap.
It's a deal.
That's an image from the book that was arguably one of my favourite moments from the book. And we get the clouds parting from the moon like the clawed hands of the other mother. The many transitions in this film, in fact, they're all wonderful. And I think in animation, the little details are absolutely essential because they stand out so much more. You know, knowing it took all this effort to animate them. Like the tapping of the shoe thing everybody talks about from Spirited Away, bothering to animate it, it makes you notice those moments all the more, and this film is packed with tiny little nuanced things to make what could be just an ordinary shot so much more appealing. Take even the beginning of the film as well, before Coraline enters the fantasy world. There's a rug that folds annoyingly when Coraline walks past, Coraline entering a room by swinging on the door, or her playing with a creaking door to annoy her dad, jumping down the steps instead of running. You know, these are tiny things where a lot of films would have just had her walk ordinarily through those shots, but these little touches add character both to Coraline and to this scenery in general, these early scenes. The real mundane house is given character, which is particularly clever when you consider the emotional message of this film. Because this is a story about a girl who feels neglected by her parents.
I almost fell down a well yesterday, Mom.
Uh-huh.
I would have died.
That's nice.
They're always very busy working and writing, and they don't really listen to her. A painfully relatable experience I'm sure most kids have had growing up. You know, when you're stuck in the house and you're bored and you can't really settle and your parents are just throwing out random things for you to go off and do so that you leave them alone and they can get on with their work. You can understand that from the parents' point of view, but you can also understand it from Coraline's perspective at the same time. And yeah, this is a story about a girl who feels neglected, where she then discovers this other version of her parents who are super nice and super interested in her, and they listen to everything she says and give her everything she wants and make everything so much more entertaining than the mundane reality. But in many ways, the emotional message of this film is the complete opposite of that kid with bad parents who escapes through fantasy sort of trope. The point of this film is that Coraline isn't meant to escape the mundane reality. What she's meant to do is gradually realise just how interesting the mundane reality actually is, and realise just how much her parents actually love her, and that whilst this other mother may offer superficial comforts and gifts, it's not real love. It's actually something pretty sinister, which becomes particularly sinister when you see the other mother as like a stranger offering Coraline sweets and gifts sort of thing. You know, that's pretty dark. And this is why it's so important to the emotion of the story that the ordinary, mundane world is actually full of character and wonder and adventure, despite how empty their house is that they've just moved into. You know, there's character and adventure to be found in Coraline just walking around it, and there's the interesting eccentricities of the real versions of her neighbours, Babinski's weird...
I did not call him crazy, Coraline. He's drunk.
...and trying to train mice to perform acrobatics and play instruments. Miss Spink and Forcible are washed-up actresses still both obsessed with being centre stage and just squabbling with each other like petty old women for that limelight in ordinary conversations. And plus they have like 1 billion old pet dogs of theirs that they had stuffed and placed on a giant shelf. And YB even is odd and interesting and fun. So the point is, it seems mundane and boring to Coraline at first, and that her parents just ignore and don't love her, but that's not true. You know, we see lots of tender moments between them, just Coraline kind of overlooks those moments to begin with. And we see her actually getting on with YB and just enjoying his company, yet on a more superficial level she claims he's annoying and prefers this superficial version of him that doesn't speak and therefore can't annoy her.
So he can't talk at all?
Nope.
I like it.
But again, that's just superficial. Without his voice, YB is without his real character and is then actually kind of boring and makes her feel more lonely. And then she loses her real parents and is in a house alone, and we get this moment where she makes pillow versions of them that just makes your heart melt, you know? She realises just how much she loves them and misses them. So the fact the real world only seems mundane on a superficial level but actually has genuine deeper character and warmth, even to the locations themselves. You know, tiny details as well, like going to this clothes shop, and there's a Shakespeare festival happening around town and we just see interesting shots in the background where this happens. They didn't need to bother animating that, you know, but it adds such a sense of character to what could have been an ordinary moment. So yeah, emotionally, Coraline realises, like all kids learn at some point growing up, superficial gifts and care don't equate to real love. how common it is that a little kid won't get something he wants and will then declare, "My parents hate me." Like Coraline sort of does when her mum won't buy her these yellow gloves. "My parents hate me, my other mother would have bought me them." But you get older and you learn, you come to trust they love you without the need of superficial gifts to prove it. You just come to trust on a deeper level, and then out of that, you love them even more in return. And that's just such a nice message to such a dark film. It's a really good film, and I'll say 2 more things before I mention a few negatives. One is the simplicity of the geography in this film, like the book as well. There's just like 5 places. There's Coraline's home, then there's Babinski who's upstairs, Spink and Forcible who are downstairs, the garden that's just outside, and then the well which is far off into the distance, somewhere away, We obviously have the reversed versions of these locations in the fantasy world too, but inside, outside, upstairs, downstairs, and far away. That's it. Visually, it's so clear from the beginning, and I think the fact we understand the geography immediately frees up the animators to mess about with all this other weird stuff. The audience is never, getting too caught up and confused about where everything is, meaning there's more space to confuse them about what everything is. I think that makes sense. And the other thing is just how genuinely haunting forced positivity always is. I'm not quite sure why exactly. There's that game, I forget the name of, that centres around that idea, isn't there? And the idea of somebody telling us they care and insisting we be grateful and love them in return, and that we have to be happy and nice about it, it's a terrifying concept. And I think it might be because that kind of idea takes your voice away, where suddenly you're not allowed to express any negative feelings and they get kind of trapped in a cage. That's scary. Killing off half your identity, like the way we see the other Wybie who has no voice and is forced to smile all the time. And people who tell us they care but are actually out to exploit us. I guess that's what this sort of thing technically boils down to, an other mother pretending she loves you when all the time she just wants to eat your soul. I think it works as horror because it's a fundamental worry we all have at times in our lives, I guess. That worry that people who say they care are actually lying. The worry that they might one day turn around and metaphorically eat our souls. The fact we all know that worry, I think, is what lends itself to the horror of something like The Other Mother. No! My few negatives about this film, because it is fantastic but obviously not perfect. I think Coraline is made a bit older here than I imagined her in the book, and she's made a lot less scared of everything. And that's a shame, because that was arguably the main point of the book. Neil Gaiman wanted to write a scary story for kids to teach them that they can manage fear, that even when the little girl Coraline is terrified and has to do things she really, really doesn't want to, that she still can find a way through it. But a lot less emphasis is placed on Coraline being scared in this film. I want moments like in the book where she hesitates, where she knows there's something she has to do and kind of physically has to force herself. I wanted to see her panic, but all that level of fear is reduced a little too much in the film, I feel. The fight Coraline has with her other dad in insect form is a real moment of danger in the book. Here, it's just sort of over in a few seconds, and you're like, oh, okay. And the bit where Coraline is thrown through a mirror and has to spend ages trapped in this dark, cramped space, starving with nothing to eat. For a kid, that's terrifying in the book. But here it's just not emphasised enough, I don't feel. And there's like that bit in this film where she's failed and she thinks she's going to be trapped here for good and starts crying, but it's only like 2 seconds of crying before the cats actually solved everything and, oh look, I haven't failed after all. 2 seconds of despair is not long enough to connect to that feeling. We need more of that feeling there, and I get the sense it probably was longer, but they cut it to give themselves a more concise runtime, which is a shame. The third act in general I think is a bit rushed and could have done with just like an extra 10 or 15 minutes so that the third act was less formulaic and more emotion was drawn out. Because the concept of fear is integral to this book. This is a kid's book where Neil Gaiman will lead the readers through a world of horror, but weaves a lot of talk about fear and bravery and learning to manage throughout it all, so that whilst the kid is led through this terrifying experience, when it comes to the conclusion, they're left feeling 10 feet taller and braver and like they can take on the world now. And Coraline is scared about going back to school after the summer holiday in the book, but after all this happens with the other mother, we get this line right at the end that says, "Normally on the night before the first day of term, Coraline was apprehensive and nervous, but she realised there was nothing left about school that could scare her anymore." And that's fantastic, and we don't get it in the film. It's a big shame. I feel just a little more runtime to not rush the third act and draw out the fear and emotion of it, plus just a couple of lines to mention Coraline being scared about going back to school a bit more and then feeling okay at the end of the film. With just that, we'd have had the same theme executed just as well in the film as it was in the book, so it is a shame it falls a little bit short there, but it's still a wonderful, wonderful film with some of the most creative animation I can remember seeing. I love it. And if you loved or liked this video, give it a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments, anything you think I've missed or got wrong or whatever. Subscribe if you fancy sticking around, and support me on Patreon if you are a gem, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And a special shout out to my Big Fortune patrons Brian Newbert, Devin, David Kling and Darren Burdock Latter. Thank you so much, you make a big difference.